Red Dwarf is turning 30 years old this very month, and what better way to celebrate this milestone than by celebrating the absolute worst episodes that this series has to offer. This is John Geeks, and do stick around to the end of the video to find out what I consider to be the worst ever episode of Red Dwarf. And spoilers, it's almost certainly not the episode you think it's going to be. Red Dwarf is a popular science fiction sitcom in Britain and has been spanning the last 30 years and has accrued an individual 73 episodes in that time. We're just going to be focusing on the 10 worst today, and here's how this is going to go down. On the screen at the minute, you're seeing the episode Duct Soup. It was an episode from Series 7, wasn't that great. So, you've got the name there, so far so sensible. The pink box is the rank that I've given it out of 73 episodes. The silver one is the most recent fan poll, known as the Silver Survey by Ganymede and Titan, and the red box is an average of all the polls I could get my hands on. Some are even as far back as 1992, and the most recent one is 2013. There's going to be a new one released on the 15th of February, so do check that out on Ganymede and Titan as well. With that out of the way, let's get on to the 10th worst episode ever. Robbery is one of those episodes from Series 7 that felt like it was cleverer than it actually was. If you start thinking about it in any kind of logical way, then the whole plot really does start tying itself up in knots. It was a great vehicle to introduce Kochanski into the crew, but apart from that, there's just not a lot going on. The obscene phone call side of it aside, and maybe the pink dressing gown kind of salvage it, but this episode does really go to show what the rest of Series 7 would show as well. Red Dwarf without Rimmer doesn't quite work. And I say that as a fan of Kochanski's character, it's just a bit of a shame. Coming in at number 9 is a Series 6 episode, Rimmerworld. Normally, you don't see Series 6 episodes towards the bottom of an episodic pile for Red Dwarf, but I've chosen this one purely because I think that the concept of this episode could have been a lot better. Think about it, a planet inhabited entirely by Rimmers. The notion of multiple Rimmers has been revisited again fairly recently, and arguably done quite a bit better than this episode. The concept never really got properly off the ground. It almost spends too much time setting itself up and then doesn't deliver the goods. The only main salvaging thing about this one is that Crichton, for a change, gets the short solution, whereas Lister has to do the exposition-heavy dialogue. It's a nice little bounce around for what's typical for them, but there's just not much happening in the episode itself. And here we have another surprise with Stasis Leak, a Series 2 episode, and I'm being quite controversial with this one. So, it normally does quite well in the polls. Its most recent result was a score of 19, and that is also its average. Its single worst result has been a score of 37 in 1999. I personally don't like this episode very much. I don't like the concept, I don't like the setting, and the whole thing just feels a little bit confusing. The lift scene is pretty great, the whole death is certain line, loved that. But apart from that, it's one of these episodes that really hasn't aged very well at all. Primarily because Lister and Kochanski never get together. That's not a thing. So yeah, you can't blame Rob or Doug for not knowing that the series was going to be going in 30 years' time and that plotline would never work out. But even so, it's just one of those episodes that doesn't hold up. Another Series 7 episode after that, we have Nan Aki, the conclusion of the Series 6, Series 7 arc on Starbug. And the solution is that Red Dwarf was in the laundry basket. That's it. I've given this a score of 66 out of 73. It's performed generally towards the bottom of the pile. Its previous result was 56, and it has an average of 45, with its best performance being 36 in 1997. A Series 1 episode in the bottom 10, what is happening? Waiting for God is one of those unusual episodes, and one of those rare ones in the original run in that it is a cat-focused episode. Kind of. The episode revolves around the evolution of the cat people on Red Dwarf and how their society was structured around basically a theological misunderstanding of some of the things that Lister had left in Frankenstein's basket. Things including a laundry list, for example. The Quagars aspect of the episode is kind of funny, and they did experiment with the format in adding a joke into the end credits, but even so, there's just not a lot going on. The main problem with this episode is that We don't care about the cat people that much because we never see the species. I've given this a score of 67. Its best performance was in 1994 with a score of 35. Its average is 34, and its most recent result was 41. This is one of those episodes that has always kind of lingered towards the bottom, and it's fairly easy to see why. It's just not very interesting, and there aren't a lot of jokes. Rain the hate, guys. Pete Part 2 is not the worst episode of Red Dwarf. I know, what am I thinking? This is one of those episodes that gets a lot of vitriol, and it's understandable why. There's a CGI dinosaur, there's a cow vindaloo, a lot of it just doesn't work, but for some strange reason I think it's slightly superior to its first part, simply because it's so ludicrous you kind of have to laugh with it, or laugh at it, more specifically, actually. This one's always done very poorly. The last poll it got bottom spot with 61. Its average is 43. Intriguingly, however, in 1999, it managed a very respectable score of 17, coupled with its first part as well. And in the succeeding slot, we have Pete Part 1. This probably would have worked quite well if it was a standalone episode called Captain's Office. I'm stealing that off of Ganymede and Titan, but I like the idea of it, and it probably should have been a thing. There's enough going on in this episode to justify it being its own little standabout thing. The problem with the episode is it does feel like it is setting up the second part, and obviously the second part doesn't deliver. As a consequence, the first part doesn't actually have a whole lot to do. There's again not a lot of jokes, the characterization's all over the place, there's no focus on any two particular people, the settings change nearly constantly. I think it moves too much. Its average score is a 42, and its last result was 60, so marginally better than Part 2, but even so, when lumped together, they're both pretty awful. And then, in spots 70 to 72, we have the entirety of Back to Earth. I'm not going to go through these individually for the simple fact that I've only watched these about twice, I think it was, and I don't have very fond memories. My particular preference is Part 1, Part 3, and Part 2 in that order, going from best to worst, but even when lumped together, it's not great. The premise of this was Red Dwarf goes to Coronation Street. Yeah, I wasn't looking forward to it when it aired, and it even then managed to disappoint me. Its most recent scores were 53, 49, and 52 in that order, and that's the only poll that they have taken part in so far, so the averages would be exactly the same. I think this deserves to go towards the bottom of the pile just because it's not very funny, the setting is miles off, and it is still trying to do the Red Dwarf movie thing, which I think this has now proven should never be a thing because it's never going to work. Red Dwarf is a sitcom, and it works best as a sitcom. Standout moments of this was Craig Charles acting in the first part when he thought that Kochanski was dead, and the reveal of Kochanski at the end. I didn't much care for the Blade Runner homages. I didn't think they worked particularly well, and the whole thing just felt kind of self-glorifying, which for a 20th anniversary special it should have been. I just feel like it should have done something else. So, if that entire cacophony of shite is not the worst episode of Red Dwarf, in my humble opinion, then what in the name of God possibly could be? Ladies and gentlemen, my personal worst Red Dwarf episode is this. Time Wave. 73rd out of 73 episodes, and in the most recent series. On paper, this should have plenty going for it. The problem is, it doesn't work in a plot or structural way. We start on a gas moon, and there's some horrendous, cheesy dialogue, very predictable jokes, very childish, and there's some unbelievably cliched dialogue in Starbug as well. The entire thing kind of feels like a B-movie. Actually, scratch that. It feels like Doug took a day off and an intern wrote the episode. It is dreadful. It's like 80s Doctor Who, but it doesn't feel like a satire, it just feels crap. The costumes are hideous, they're supposed to be tacky and hideous, and the problem is, the joke doesn't work, it just makes the whole thing feel cheap and rushed and crappy. The acting is dreadful. Johnny Vegas is in it, I mean, enough said with that one. Even the potential salvage of having Rimmer's persona come out as a personified beast yet again doesn't do enough to salvage this episode. It's cliched, hammy, and it feels really, really rushed. To be fair, it probably was really, really rushed, which would explain a lot. If it wasn't, then dear God, what happened here? So, that is my top 10 worst episodes of Red Dwarf. Do you agree with what I've put forward? Do you think that Peak 2 still deserves to be at the bottom of the pile? Let me know down below what you think is the worst episode of Red Dwarf. Do also check out the website Ganymede and Titan. I got a lot of information for this from that website, and they will be publishing a 30th anniversary poll, which includes Series 11 and Series 12 on the 15th of February. So if you're watching this in the distant future, go check that out now. Thank you very much for watching, listening, however this works out, and please also do subscribe to the channel. It would be amazing to see a lot of new faces, always welcoming more fans of more fandoms. And do stick around for next week's episode where I go through the top 10 best episodes of Red Dwarf. And if this poll was a surprise to you, then that one will have you in stitches. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I'll catch you next time.